When it comes to cool-looking cars of the 1970s, the 1971 Caprice and Impala has to be one of my favorites. The cars were new for that particular model year after running in the previous generation from 1965 through 1970, and the styling of the 1971s took them in a completely new direction. Out front, you now had a much more wraparound-like front glass with toothpicky A-pillars and beautifully curved side glass that complemented the more tubular-like sides and forms of this particular generation versus the previous one. And there were a number of cues on the front of the vehicle, and in particular the Caprice that you see here, that gave them, let's say, luxury cues, like that significant prow on the hood, very familiar to Cadillac owners for many years, as well as that egg crate style grille, which was also a luxury car trait of the era. The 1971 Caprice and Impala were highly successful, but in this particular video, we're going to take a look at what might have been. This final production version was obviously a very cleanly styled car, and I have to say one of my favorite elements of it, if you transition here, is that concave backlight that had to have cost Chevrolet a fortune. And of course, Chevrolet was the only division during these particular model years that had that concave backlight. They had started that a few years earlier, but they continued it on through this particular generation. For whatever reason, Chevrolet thought that that had to be a definitive styling feature for these cars. However, in this video, we're going to take a look at what could have been for 1971 on the Caprice and Impala. In particular, we will examine a few different design proposals because I think that the viewers would enjoy seeing these, and some of them are quite dramatic and, frankly, I think are pretty good looking. GM styling at this point was, pardon the pun, literally running on all cylinders, and some of the clay models that you're going to see here, full-size models, just look absolutely gorgeous. And while I like the final production version, I have to say that some of these also look really good. Let's get started. And here's the first clay model that we will examine. Take a look at this. This is a pretty dramatically styled proposal for the 71 Impala. I'm pretty sure it's for the 71 because notice the front glass, how it has that curvature and the toothpick A-pillars. That would be shared across all of the General Motors full-size vehicles for 1971. It does look like there are two proposals going on here, one on the passenger side, one on the driver's side. If you look, the windshield and the roof is a little bit different on the driver's side versus the passenger side. But nonetheless, let's just talk about the one that we see here, the passenger side variant. Now, the first thing that you obviously notice is the proposal here has stacked headlamps. And that, to me, is a shock because stacked headlamps really was something that was kind of going out of vogue around the late 1960s. Remember, Pontiac had stacked headlamp cars all the way through 1967. They ran from 1963 to 1967 model years. And Ford, of course, during those years also had stacked headlamp cars in the mid-1960s. Chrysler did as well. And Cadillac did through the 1968 model year. That started with 1965 for Cadillac. But by the end of the 1960s, the stacked headlamp trend had really just gone out of style and was now passé. And I suspect that's why this particular styling proposal wasn't bought, because the stacked headlamps just weren't cool anymore. In fact, by the time the late 60s had really finished and the early 70s were starting, it's really tough to think of a stacked headlamp car from a North American automaker for that reason. I think part of the reason, too, was that the stacked headlamps didn't emphasize the horizontal nature and the overall width of the vehicle. Although with cars that are 80 inches wide, I don't know that you necessarily need to emphasize the width. To me, what's also interesting about this proposal is you do get that width from the grille. And the grille, to me, complements the hood form rather well. But I have to say the hood form on this really reminds me of a 63 to 65 Riviera type hood. So it's kind of an interesting mix between mid-60s era styling tastes and trends with that stacked headlamp up front and the hood form. I also have to say that this particular vehicle does have a styling cue that was passé by this point as well, and that is the kind of fastback-like roofline that you see here. That had really kind of gone out of style by the late 1960s, And so I suspect in general that between the stacked headlamps up front and that fastback-like roofline out back, that General Motors designers just felt that the time had passed for those particular styling cues, and so this clay model was shelved. But I do have to say that I love a particular element here of the body side, namely those bulges that surround the front and rear wheel. They appear to be sculpted to perfection here. Notice the bulge and up front, how it starts ahead of the wheel, and there's almost like this little skeg line below the crease. And take a look at the reflections in the lighting in the design studio here on those bulges. It's just fantastic. I do love the preciseness of that lower crease, and then there's also the upper crease that you can see. It's a bit more, let's say, dull. The lower crease is very sharp. The upper crease is not quite as precise, starting all the way from the upper headlamp and then running rearward on the vehicle. It kind of creates this nice frame on the body side to shrink it a little bit visually, particularly from this angle. You don't have that heft that you would have without those creases, especially because the body tucks in so severely, let's say, underneath that lowermost crease. I think that body side looks fantastic, and the bulges here, to me, look way better than they did even on the latter 60s, 1970s Chevrolet, let's say, where, to me at least, they don't look as precise. Here, the clay modelers, I think, did a fantastic job. Now, here I suspect is a proposal that evolved from the one that I just showed before, and you'll notice that there are some similar elements. Namely, you have that fastback roofline that continues to persist here. You still have that wraparound front glass with the toothpick A-pillars. But notice the body side is significantly different. Now you just have the single prominent crease there that is moved midline on the body side and is pretty sharp up front, kind of dulls out as it goes rearward. There is another crease that's below that one where the body tucks under, but you don't have kind of that dual crease theme that the previous model had shown. Now, you also have an interesting front end. First, take a look at the bumper, the wraparound bumper that has those shark gills, I'll call them, for the turn signals up front and in the lower section, very similar to what was on the 1970 Chevrolet. And I would also say that the headlamp area is very similar to the 1970 Chevrolet, although you have quite prominent dividers here. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this proposal to me is this obviously did not become the face of the 1971 Chevrolet, but it did kind of become the face of the 71-72 Oldsmobile. And I suspect what ended up happening is GM design leadership entered the Chevrolet studios, and it had to have been, I would say, Bill Mitchell perhaps himself, because I think by this point, Bill Mitchell had two executive assistant designers, Chuck Jordan and Irv Ribicki, and they had split the divisional responsibilities of design into, I believe, Buick, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac under one individual, and then Chevrolet and Pontiac under another individual. This was before the BOC CPC days that came with the GM reorg in 1984. But the design team had that split occurring because, well, they were trying to develop a succession plan for Mr. Mitchell, and Chuck Jordan and Irv Ribicki were the two contenders. So in order for something to migrate from the Chevrolet to the Oldsmobile studio, it had to be a very, very senior design leader in GM who took this cue from Chevrolet and put it on the Olds. And it could have, like I said, even been Mr. Mitchell himself. Now, another interesting thing about this proposal is notice at the rear quarter glass, that gap between the rear quarter glass and the C-pillar, and that really arises because the quarter panel is bulging out a little bit back there relative to the midsection of the body, and so you get that interesting gap. But I do find it kind of cool that this is an example of something that was pretty typical during the time frame, namely that GM design executives would take elements from various studios and kind of combine them or rob them from one vehicle to put them on another. This, like I said, most closely resembles to me the 72 Oldsmobile front end. Obviously, Olds would have a different grille. Here, Chevrolet has the twin port grille with the upper and lower portion. Oldsmobile on the 88s would have a split grille and a bladed grille on the 88s, and then a split egg crate style grille on the 98s. But different style from what you see on this model, but obviously clearly some inspiration there for Oldsmobile. And then we have this particular full-size proposal, which I have to say I think is a fantastic-looking vehicle. There are some interesting things about this, though. First of all, let's notice the overall body side. We're starting to get something that more approximates the final car in terms of the softer forms versus the creases. There is still a lower body side crease where the rocker and the body kind of tucks in under, but not quite as pronounced, and you don't really have that midline crease or the upper one that you saw in the previous proposals. Just have this soft radius that I think is beautiful. I believe this photo is taken in the GM Design Dome, and look at how the light is creating a highlight on the top, and then you get the shadow in the body side. Just a fantastic look. You, of course, do have the triple tail lamp theme out back, something that started with the 1958 Chevrolet, and a beautiful deck lid crease that runs not only on the top of the deck lid, but then down as the deck lid kind of curves to meet the bumper. A very delicate bumper and thin bumper that's beautifully integrated, notice, with the side, I should call it the lower body side trim, which is very tasteful and not overdone on this car, but I think just gives it that look of luxury to have those rocker moldings and then the bright work that's behind the rear wheel scooping up to meet that bumper on this particular rear three-quarter view. Then I have to comment, you have the front glass looks very similar in the A-pillars to the final model, but notice again, you still have that fastback roofline. You don't have the concave backlight again in this. I wonder if GM designers were trying to help the cost cutters and figure out ways to make the rear window look good without being curved, because that was probably costly. And I guess at the last minute they went with that concave backlight again that they had also in the late 1960s Chevrolets, the previous generation. But notice you have these kind of air extractor vents behind the rear quarter glass, this very European-like feature that looks massive on this car because the daylight opening is huge. I mean, the glass area on this car is just massive. And as a consequence, that fake, which is likely fake on this car, extractor vent is much larger than it was on any European car of the era. But I love that the designers were clearly taking inspiration from overseas. Even GM's own design, like various Opals, had that. But I think it actually looks really good here. And another thing that you'll notice is this beautiful roof line with that crease that kind of comes down the C-pillar and starts to form the top of the quarter panel. And one thing that GM designers did during this era really well was have this beautiful, gentle kind of arc to the roof lines that crested downward as it went rearward. Actually, there's a couple things. That rear kind of portion of the roof is cresting downward, and then so is that radius on the body side, that dull radius that starts up at the front of the fender and moves rearward. Notice how that radius and the kind of midpoint of it gently slopes downward as it goes toward the rear of the car, and the highlight is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the shadow is getting smaller and smaller. So it gives some kind of dynamic nature to the car as opposed to that midpoint of the radius just being flat. It looks a lot better, I think. And one of the things you could get with that is this saggy butt look, but I think some cars suffer from that a little bit, like the Bustleback Seville, especially if the rear air ride suspension is not functioning properly. But I think this car just executes it overall very well. And there you have it, several design proposals for the 1971 Caprice and Impala. I do think that the final variant that you see here was an attractive car, as I previously mentioned. And, well, I just have to say, though, that some of those full-size models that you saw, particularly the lattermost one, were pretty striking. So which would you have preferred be the 1971 Caprice and Impala? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.